I've changed microphones now just because I was going through the first part and I noticed there's a lot of annoying little bits of noise that hopefully aren't too distracting, but this should be a lot better. Throwing the other one in the bin. So yeah, I'm just going to go through all the Pokemon now. I'm going to be kind of quick fire because there are a lot that I want to go through. Yeah, going to get started with Armaldo. So based on what we said before, Armaldo, good physical attacker. Rock Bug typing's quite good stab combo. It's got a really high attack stat. Speed stat is obviously buffed as well, I think, from 50 or 55 or whatever it used to be. And it has a pretty decent move pool. It doesn't have to rely on HP Bug anymore as it gets Signal Beam in this tier. It gets Analytic, which means that if you're slower than your opponent, you hit a little bit harder. And you can also run a Swift Sim set as well if you want to on a Rain team, which probably is pretty good to be honest, I would imagine, just because it gives you a physical attacker on a Rain team, which otherwise ADV doesn't really have quite the abundance of selection for that. So that's quite nice. Obviously, like, you've got a physical set with either a choice band or you can just go leftover as attack and use it as a bit more of a an offensive pivot, if you will, but you can also go with a defensive set. It gets either Rapid Spin or Knockoff. It doesn't get both on the same set, it has to choose between them because they're not compatible with each other. It also gets interesting things like Harden, for example, which is usually used in OU to wall Snorlax, but in this tier, if Kamala ends up being quite a good mon, it could be quite good to run that. And I think we'll talk about Kamala when I get to it, but I do think it's a good Pokemon. So that might be worth considering in the future. And obviously it gets attacks like Earthquake and Rock Slide, which I think I mentioned. It gets Rock Blast as well if you want to try and hit some subs down, but lower accuracy in Gen 3, unfortunately. Brick Break, yeah, get some good moves, good mon. I would compare it probably to Regirock in the sense that it fulfills a similar role as a kind of strong physical rock type. Regirock specifically though gets Explosion and Thunder Wave as support, and it also gets some interesting things like Focus Punch as well, which Armaldo doesn't get. So there's a bit of trade-off between using both of them, but Armaldo is probably overall the better mon for most teams, but for a more offensive team, I suppose Regirock's probably a little bit better. Okay, probably not going to go into so much detail on every Pokemon actually, now that I think about it, because I've got about 85 Pokemon to go through. Next one is Articuno. I'm not going to go through everything because there are literally hundreds of Pokemon, so I'm just going to pick and choose what I think is at least viable, if not good in the tier. And Articuno is the next one I'm going to discuss. Seems pretty good defensively. It's a Ice Flying type, which is not bad, gives it Spike Immunity. It's got a good special defense stat, good HP, and stab Ice Beams, which is always nice. I think it's pretty much limited to defensive teams, as it's fairly fast, Space 85, but not like especially or anything, and as an ice type it's outclassed by things like Jinx if it wants to be an offensive ice type, I would say. Mr. Rhyme as well. But the main thing that Articuno gets is the Haze attack, which allows you to obviously reset something setting up in front of you, like a Calm Minder. And on top of that, it also gets Keel Bell, so it gets a quite interesting combination of both Haze and Phase and team support on the same set. And it also gets Roar as well, if you'd rather use that over Haze, but you've kind of got the choice there, which is quite nice. As for other things, I think it gets both screens, so it gets Reflect and Light Screen. It doesn't get Light Screen in this tier, so it just gets Reflect, but there's a couple of options that you can run on it, such as like Toxic or Hidden Power, for example. Next Pokemon is its cousin, Articuno Galar. I've talked about this before in a fair amount of detail in my previous video, so I'll just go over it very quickly, but I don't think the sets have really changed. It's still a Heal Bell Recover user with Stab Psychic and a good special attack stat. It gets Calm Mind and it gets Hidden Power, and honestly that's all it's got going for it really. It hasn't really appealed to me that much as a Pokemon. I've not been using it. It's way too bad into Dark types to even be worth considering. So, and because Dark types are quite good in this tier, especially things like Moltres, Galar and others, it's just, I don't want to use it, to be honest. Next Pokemon is Bishop, which is a new addition. It's only just dropped recently. And you get to choose between Shed Skin and Pressure. You're a Dark Steel type with a good special attack stat. That's the adjustment it's had for Hoenn Gaiden. and that will make you a better Pursuit user. So you can run Pursuit, you can also run Crunch as it learns that in Hoenn Gaiden, and then you can run either Brick Break or Focus Punch. Hidden Power Fire is not too bad off of that special attack stat. It also gets Sucker Punch if you want some priority. There's quite a few good options here, to be quite honest. Yeah, good Pokemon. I've fiddled around with it a little bit, and it's really good at punishing things like Frostlass from taking over the early game. You can kind of come in on it pretty safely, not too worried about Ice Beam other than maybe the potential freeze. But even with Shed Skin, it kind of eases that at least a little bit. Gives you a much more reliable chance to thaw. Yeah, good Pokemon. Gets Thunder Wave, gets Toxic, gets Rock Slide, gets Swords Dance even, which is probably not that interesting considering its attack stats only 19. It doesn't really learn any good Steel moves, but it has a fair few tools. It's quite nice. It's got a nice defensive profile as well. It's obviously Toxic immune as well, and can check quite a lot of good things with its Stark Steel typing, with the Psychic immunity, the Rock resistance, just things like that. It's quite nice. We're going to look at Breloom next, it seems. So that's another new drop. Breloom's the same as it is in ADV-OU, to be honest. So it's good with max attack, max speed, Spore, and whatever else your team probably needs. It obviously stings quite a lot because it's got a really big attack stat. So just be prepared for that, I suppose. And yeah, don't really know what else to say about it. Other people have talked in lots of depth about Breloom in ADV-OU, and it doesn't really perform any differently here, to be honest. Still a good Pokemon though, it's got a fast Spore and really strong attacks. Yeah, that's all I've got to say. Next Pokemon's Camerupt, which is almost the same as ADV. The main defining difference is that other than Magma Armor, you can also run the ability Mold Breaker. This allows you to hit some Levitate Pokemon such as Electros with an Earthquake. That's kind of the main use you'll get out of that ability. I suppose it does also mean that you can potentially burn things with Water Veil. I don't think there's anything of too much relevance that gets it, but that's also something to consider, I suppose. Kind of performs pretty similarly to how it does in ADV. The main thing I like about Camerupt in this tier though, and I think this Pokemon's pretty good in UU, is that it's able to fit on offensive teams with Explosion, and also it works as a pretty good plus-all check. It kind of comes in on all of its attacks, unless it's running HP Water, for example, and punishes pretty hard with the Earthquake, which is always going to one-hit KO a plus-all. So that's quite nice, and yeah, 2 big thumbs up from me on this Pokemon. I think it's pretty good. I've gotten some good results with it as well, and I think it really nicely fits onto a lot of teams, offensive teams specifically. Next Pokemon we're going to talk about, Chansey. It's similar to Blissey, except you've got a really bad special attack stat, so if you want to run a special attack, you really have to kind of justify it in some way or another. I suppose Flamethrower in theory could be okay just because of the burn chance to help you get some more damage, but it's pretty ugly in the damage calc. You've really got to plan your way out of justifying this move, I think, as a pretty standard set I would probably run is probably going to just be Seismic Toss, a status move, and Toxic or Thunder Wave. You could probably run both, to be honest. I don't see anything wrong with that. Soft Boiled and Heal Bell, or Aromatherapy if you're feeling fancy. Both do the same thing in this tier, more or less. And just run max defense and EVs wherever else. Put some in HP if you want. Put some in speed is always nice because you don't really need it. You could even put it in Spadef, just help you against Calm Minders. There's a +1 Psychic from something like Alakazam. Will just punch through this Chansey eventually and it can't do too much back. So that's basically how I think Chansey should be used in this tier. Pretty similar to Blissey, just it can't really do any damage other than using the Seismic Toss. I think it's pretty good though. For defensive teams it fulfills quite a lot. Like it checks all the special attackers pretty decently, spreads Toxic, and can also run Heal Bell to support, so it's quite nice. You can run it alongside some rest users on your team. Next Pokemon is Crawdaunt. If I can see it. I seem to have missed out Chestnut though and Charizard. I missed out a handful, so we're going to go through those quickly. So Charizard, don't think I've talked about it before. I think it's a new drop. Basically, it's a special attacker or a mixed attacker with a good speed stat. It's pretty similar to Plusle, except it's got a way better move pool. Oh yeah, I talked about it in part 1 of my video. So I won't go into too much detail, but you can run either a Fire Blast set with coverage, such as Dragon Claw, HP Water, HP Electric for Gara. Toxic is also quite nice with it, has good synergy. Just things like that. Substitute as well if you want. Gives you some ease on prediction. You can also run Brick Break, Focus Punch to hit Chansey. It's quite nice. Or you can just go for a Subbataya Sunny Day set with ridiculously high special attack, flamethrowers and fire blast, overheat, blast burn, whatever you want to pick to just completely destroy your opponent. And that's how Charizard is used basically. There's probably some other things that I've missed out, but yeah, for the most part, that's probably what Charizard wants to do. Next Pokemon is going to be Chestnut. One of the premier spikers of the tier, I'd say. It's better than most Pokemon at being able to lay spikes, although I really think, other than Dunsparce, who I'll get to, laying spikes in this tier is still very difficult. I feel that the spikers, compared to OU, are just very flimsy and have very exploitable weaknesses that they all seem to share. They all seem to be weak to either being pursuited or being hit by Ice Beam, or even fire moves, and it's been quite difficult to play around that. I mean, Dunsparce is also weak to ice moves, but it's really bulky compared to things like Sand Slash in this. And I think Chestnut, regardless of those kind of flaws, is still one of the best ones. It gets Rough Skin for one, which means it can punish some physical attackers quite nicely. But its move pool otherwise is really good. It gets things like Circle Throw, Brick Break, Bulk Up. I think it gets Swords Dance as well, if I'm not mistaken. Indeed. But typically you don't really want to be running a Swords Dance set because it doesn't have good coverage, it has more good utility, I would say. So I would say probably you just want to go Spikes. Potentially Spiky Shield is quite nice, as it basically makes it so that you deal damage to physical attackers or contact moves. Circle Throw is not too bad, although it makes you move last, and Chestnut, while not like blazing fast or anything, is not slow either, and it can really benefit from moving faster than the opponent against certain teams. So Circle Throw is a bit difficult to justify sometimes, but obviously on a Spiker it's pretty good, so you're going to be landing pretty consistent damage. But it otherwise gets things like Leech Seed. Spikes and Leech Seed is a pretty nice combo of moves. It gets Giga Drain, which can hit water types and slowly passively heal yourself. It gets Synthesis as well, which is quite nice. And yeah, you can run a vast combination of these moves, I think, at the moment. There doesn't seem to be a really definite set that it can run. Even moves like Taunt and Toxic seem pretty good to me, to be honest. Let's have a look. What else is here? Pretty much those, to be honest. Nothing else really stands out to me hugely. Focus Punch is quite cool. Counter could be nice if you're very physically defensive and you want to, I don't know, be a bit cheeky and counter a +1 Gyarados. It doesn't seem very consistent though. Like, the counter's not consistent in general, but I'd say it's probably less consistent than some counter sets you could be running, like Counter Chansey, for example, which I didn't mention, but I suppose you could run that as well. Yeah, it gets Curse as well. It's got a good move pool, I would say. Endeavour as well. Yeah, loads of good moves. Play around with it. It's a good one. Okay, what's up next? Because I seem to have missed some guys out. Chimeco, no. Clefable, no. No. Crawdon. Yeah, let's talk about Crawdon. So, you've got Shell Armor, you've got Mold Breaker. I guess Shell Armor's not terrible, but Mold Breaker at least gives you an option where you can't see it, whereas Shell Armor's kind of, you know, you don't know whether it's actually helping you game to game or not unless you're playing every game Crawdon, and for some reason you're really getting crit all the time. I guess if you're superstitious like that, it could be good, but otherwise, yeah, Crawdon, Mold Breaker, good special attack stats. Attacking stats are probably being flipped in some fashion, I imagine. No, I'm not too sure about that actually. That doesn't sound correct at all. But it's a very different Pokemon, other than its typing. It's a slow special attacker with good coverage, so it gets things like Hydro Pump, Ice Beam, Crunch, Hidden Power Electric's probably not too bad to hit Gara as well, similar to how Charizard wants to carry it. Basically, any special attacker that doesn't learn Thunderbolt will probably want to consider it. But on top of that, it gets Agility, which turns it into a pretty threatening late game sweeper, I think. Especially if you can overwhelm the opponent's special walls. Crawdon can definitely do some good things. It's quite a good one. Let's have a look. What's next? Cryogonal. yeah, this is a Rapid Spinner, a very fast one with Stab Ice Beam, which is pretty cool. The standard set, which I would probably imagine, is probably Rapid Spin, Ice Beam, Recover, Toxic. It gets a few little things like Haze and Explosion, but I don't think Rapid Spin Explosion makes sense on this one, just because its attack stat's really low. So the Explosion's cool and it's fast. Ice Cold, in fact, I guess you could say. But it's not really able to fit easily because you kind of need all these moves to actually make progress. That's kind of the problem, and obviously it's very physically frail as well, so you really have to pick and choose where you want it to come in on. Try not to get hacked by getting burnt or poisoned or paralyzed. It's quite flimsy, unfortunately, but still seems pretty good, I think. Not too bad. And yeah, I think it is the fastest Rapid Spinner in the tier as well, so if you don't like the look of Tentacruel, which is similarly fast, it's not quite 105, it's base 100. Yeah, you could run Cryogonal, I guess, try and fit around it. It doesn't seem too bad. Bishop's still hanging out here, I'll get rid of him. Next Pokemon seems to be Dodrio, I think. I'm not really going to talk about Dugong. I'll mention Dugong quickly. It does actually have Fur Coat, but I think it's... No, I think it's pretty good actually. It gets Fur Coat and Encore, and I think I've played with that in the past. So yeah, give that guy a look. He's really bulky with base 80 defense and Fur Coat and that much HP. He's basically a Water Ice Steelix in a sense, which is quite funny. Yeah, well, let's have a look at Dodrio, which I really like. The choice you really have to make in the team builder is either between Dodrio and Staraptor. I guess I can cover Staraptor now actually, we'll compare them and they're pretty similar. I've just been comparing, yeah, in fact today I've even just been comparing these two mons. They're pretty similar. Dodrio gets Early Bird, so you could use it to absorb sleep if you really wanted, whereas Staraptor gets Intimidate, which is obviously extra utility on top of the fact that it's already pretty offensive, I would say. They're both pretty much probably just Choice Band users. It seems to be the most effective way to use them. You run Choice Band, you run a Stab Normal type move, maybe you run Double Edge or Return. So this is where they kind of diverge a little bit, but otherwise they do similar things. So Dodrio probably runs Return, Drill Peck, Low Kick, Quick Attack last. I guess HP Rock might be worth considering also. And you either run Adamant or Jolly, depending on what you're trying to achieve. Jolly seems pretty consistent, like so. Max attack, max speed. And Staraptor is the same. Same speed stats, so Adamant or Jolly, depending on what you're trying to hit. Max attack, you get a little bit more attack. But on the flip side, unfortunately, you aren't able to access to Body Slam. You're not able to access Drill Peck. And you're not able to access Low Kick, which means that you need to run either Double Edge, Return Frustration, Hidden Power Flying, and Brick Break is the fighting type coverage, and then you can run kind of whatever in the last slot, you know, hit HP Rock, Quick Attack. So yeah, they're both pretty good. They both demand a specific kind of answer, which can be easy to not consider, to be honest, in this tier, because there's so many things to check as I kind of go through the list, as you might actually see. But yeah, they're both very good. They both hit very hard and they're very hard to check. Quite nice mons. Next guy is Donphan. I just haven't been able to make it work. It does on paper look really good. It's obviously very physically bulky, quite slow. Has Analytic, which, you know, most of the time is going to be doing extra damage, but I don't know, man, I just can't make this thing work. It's so hard. Like, you get Earthquake, you get Rock Slide, I think, yeah. You get Rapid Spin, and you get Roar, you get Toxic, you can run Rest. You can even run Lunge if you want and really go hard on the store. But the problem is, I find, at least in the early days of the tier, it just doesn't really trade with anything noteworthy. All the top Pokemon can either wear it down with Spike's chip, because obviously it's going to want to come in on Spikes and spin them away in some form, or they just don't really care too much about it. Like, for example, Gyarados just kind of sets up in his face, intimidates it if it has to, subs on it and tries to go for a Rock Slide miss, or blocks a Toxic, and it just gains all the momentum, and Donphan just struggles so much to keep any form of momentum in this tier. I don't really like it, to be honest, and I can't believe I'm saying this thing's unviable, but I think it might actually be. There are just way better spinners, and it seems to be outclassed by most of them. You know, as the tier develops, it might actually develop a niche because it does have really good stats, but they just don't seem to work. Maybe my optics are just not good enough, but yeah, I'm not a big fan of Donphan at the moment, to be honest. Okay, so Dracovish. This is a wall, I suppose. If I remember correctly, it gets Super Fang, which is quite funny. It gets Sand Veil, which I suppose isn't too relevant in UU because there's no sand setters. But it also gets Water Absorb, which means you can obviously come in on a cheeky water attack and absorb it and heal yourself. You can tell I've probably never used this one. Or you can probably tell I've never used it because I haven't. Yeah, it's pretty bulky, to be honest. It's pretty funny. It's got a very janky move pool of just water type moves and ice type moves, and it can be quite annoying to kill. I would say it's definitely got a niche on certain teams, but I'm not 100% sure what those teams are. But yeah, try and build with it, I guess, if you want. So Dragalge, not really too interested. I wasn't going to talk about it, but it seems to be specifically limited to stall. It's a very bulky poison dragon type with recover, so that's the thing. Recover haze by the looks of it. Doesn't actually seem too bad, to be honest. It's got some interesting tools, but it does seem a little bit too passive. I suppose you could run Dragon Claw on this set. Recover haze, Dragon Claw, Toxic doesn't seem terrible. I don't know though, I've never really thought about it too much. It's probably definitely got some kind of use, and Progology's brought it. I've seen him using it as well as other people actually, but nah. not until I have gotten through most of the other interesting ones, I don't think. Same for Druddigan. It's really cool as a mixed attacker, to be honest. I think it's got some interesting tools. It has, I think, Crunch, Pursuit, if I'm not mistaken. Gets Superpower, which is a very strong fighting type move with little drawback. And gets Flamethrower, Fire Blast, Earthquake. Yeah, it has a good move pool. It's just extremely slow, like very, very painfully and annoyingly slow. And I don't think it's defensively that interesting either with this typing. So it's something I might consider at some point, but I think it's outclassed by other pursuiters. And as a mixed attacker, I don't see why you wouldn't use something like a Charizard, for example, which has a way higher speed stat. Okay, so Dunsparce. Already talked about it, obviously, a little bit, but I can cover some old ground again, I suppose, quickly. This is the best Spiker in the tier, I would say. Very good defensively, despite the Ice weakness and the Dragon weakness, and the Fighting weakness, I suppose, as well, but you can obviously patch that up with your teammates using a Gyarados or another Flying type pretty easily, or a Psychic type even, for example. It's just very good. It appreciates Heal Bell support because it's status vulnerable, but other than that, like, if you can keep the status away from it, or if you can get enough information from your opponent to know where the Dunsparce can come in safely, then you're cooking with gas, to be honest, with this guy. He's very effective at what he does. Next Pokemon is up a little bit. Electros. Yeah, this is interesting. Probably limited to paralysis support, I would say, because it's very slow as well. But it has a really good move pool. It gets Sprit Break, Focus Punch. It gets Flamethrower, Thunderbolt on the stab. It gets Giga Drain as well, which is very interesting. So this is kind of what I would imagine the standard set looks like. And you could run maybe an Expert Belt, but I think Leftovers is kind of needed because Electros is not very good defensively. It's just not. It doesn't really resist that much. It resists Electric, which is cool, but it doesn't really want to get paralyzed. So that's not really something you want to be committing on unless you have to, or unless you're feeling risky. So I think Leftovers is probably better. But yeah, with paralysis support and spikes, this one doesn't seem too bad, I would say. It seems to fit really well alongside, or even in place of a Rhydon, which really wants the paralysis support as well. Obviously, the main benefit to using this guy over Rhydon is that it's a really, really potent mixed attacker, whereas Rhydon's just more of a physical attacker. Yeah, give it a go. It seems pretty good. Outside of paralysis support, though, I don't think it's worth considering. It's just too slow and too frail, and doesn't really have a defensive niche in the tier, other than the Earthquake immunity, which is kind of cool, but like, you know, there are loads of Earthquake immune Pokemon in the tier. And Electros isn't any special compared to those guys, as it doesn't resist anything else, to be honest. Okay, Electabuzz, no, Electrode to Usui. So yeah, this guy's fast, he's fun, he's pretty good. The standard set's probably Giga Drain, Thunderbolt, HP. I want to say Ice, but I think HP Water's also got a place. Just to hit Fustle, because this guy obviously comes in on an electric type move relatively safely, especially if they're running like a double-edged Fustle with Galvanize, can't paralyze it. And then last move Explosion. This is fine as a kind of pace-setting attacker, to be honest. I really don't think it's too bad. It does get other things, it gets Screens, it gets Rain Dance, hilariously gets Ice Ball, but I don't recommend running that, it's not a good move. And it also gets Aromatherapy over the regular Electrode, which is really cool. So it's a base 150 speed Aromatherapy user, which it sounds really goofy and probably doesn't work that effectively, but you could use it, I guess, on an offensive team with rest users or something, or maybe on a defensive team you could use this guy. I don't really know. That doesn't sound particularly amazing, but it's an option. I think Explosion with 3 attacks is perfectly fine though, and I think HP Ice is probably overall better. So yeah, I'd say this. Static over Soundproof for sure, unless there's a Pokemon which rises up with a really good sound-based move, then Soundproof could have a niche, but Static is just too good to pass up. The 30% paralysis chance, or the 33% in fact, paralysis chance is just really nice. Next guy is Entei. So yeah, Entei's been buffed. He's, I think, the same stats here, but he gets Earthquake now, he gets Extreme Speed now, he gets, I don't know if he got Rock Slide in ADV, but he gets Rock Slide now as well, or not. But also he gets Sacred Fire, most importantly, which is really good. Pair it with Spikes, and this guy's gonna, he's gonna cook basically with Sacred Fire, and Calm Mind and Hidden Power Grass, I suppose, would be quite good. Kind of just burning things and fucking things up. Sorry, excuse my language. Seems pretty good. You could also run Toxic, as I was talking about before. 5 types of Toxic, good synergy. Good option. Yeah. Entei seems really good. I've not actually built with it yet, but next time I play in a tournament or fancy just being a bit creative, I'm definitely going to give this guy a go. He's pretty cool. Espeon. So Espeon is it's the same as ATV, to be honest. I don't think it gets anything new. In fact, it does get something new. It gets Growth, but it learns Calm Mind anyway, so that's not that interesting. There's probably a couple of other things that it gets. I'm not too sure. No, that seems to be it. It's the same. It's probably viable. I don't think that it's too bad in this tier. It seems quite nice just because it has Baton Pass. So you could definitely either sub or wish pass with this guy. A bit like Jolteon, but a bit slower and a little bit stronger. Yeah, don't see why not. Synchronize is pretty cool. Yeah, I think Espeon could be good, for sure. So Exeggutor, very hard to build with, to be honest. It does on paper look really good because it's got good stats, not particularly fast, of course, but you can always make up for that by the fact that it is just a ball of stats. But and it has a really good move pool. Obviously, it gets Sleep, it gets Giga, things like that. It's the same as ADV, if you're curious. But I don't know. It's just the metagame doesn't favor it too heavily. Like, there are too many Pokemon that just trade hits with it and come out on top because it's so slow. I think if it was a bit faster, or if you could justify running as much speed as you could, it might be quite good. But no, I don't think it's that good in this tier at the moment. The potential is definitely there though. Like, this is a very very scary Pokemon if it happens to find the right situations to do its things, you know, setting sleep, exploding, sporing things, setting up Sun even is a potential option. Oh, excuse me. Yeah, just for now, not so good. Future, we'll see. I don't really want to talk about Expo too much because I've not really thought about him. He's interesting in that I believe he gets Boom Burst, which is obviously a really strong normal type move, but he's friggin' slow, man. He's friggin' slow. He doesn't get any new abilities, and like, what else is there to say? He's just a slow mixed attacker or physical attacker or something. Whatever. Yeah. The next Pokemon is Fortress that I'm going to talk about. So this is another drop. It's the same as base ADV. I don't think it gets anything new. There are a lot of spikers down here and there's quite a lot of competition, but this guy is one of the most sturdy ones for sure. Pun not intended, obviously. Because it does suffer from just special attackers just coming in and like attacking and setting up. He's a bit passive and a bit too slow, like slower than even the other slow guys, and very, very difficult to justify running spikes and spin because you want to be actually causing some pressure to stuff. But it does have a toxic immunity and it is very physically bulky, so Furry is probably pretty good, but I've just been more interested in using Dunsparce because it achieves more in its role. Being able to check way more Pokemon that are quite good in the tier at the moment. Fori just finds it difficult to enter at the moment just because of how offensive everything is, and it doesn't really stop a lot of Pokemon from either, you know, setting up or just killing it, frankly. Frostlass is the next spiker, another new addition. One of the best spikers in the tier. I think the standard set is just max HP, max speed. Like so, just with leftovers. And then you can run just full support. You can either lead or back. Lead is really good. Back is also genuinely pretty good if you want to avoid getting pursuited too early or, you know, just trapped in general. And I'd say the standard set's probably just Spikes, Ice Beam, and then 2 support moves. You can mix and match and choose whatever you want between them. There's loads. So for example, it gets Taunt, it gets Destiny Bond, it gets Toxic, it gets Thunder Wave. There's a few other things of interest I think it gets. I mean, you get Shadow Ball, but there aren't really any noteworthy targets, I would say. Ice Beam's just generally a better move. You also get Thunderbolt, which is pretty cool. You can run Weather, I suppose. It gets Rain Dance, interestingly. But yeah, it's pretty standard. It gets Block, which is disgusting, as well, if you want to run that. Yeah, definitely look out for Frostlass, it's really good. If you want to run an offense team with, you know, very fast pace, or even a bit more of a laid-back team, it's just a very good spiker. So we're going to talk about Gardevoir now, I suppose. I've only really thrown one set together because it looked funny, and that was a Memento set. But I think Gardevoir has pretty good versatility. It gets Will-O-Wisp, I believe, right? Is that correct? So yeah, it's a special attacker with Will-O-Wisp and pretty good speed, pretty good special defense, and good special attack. Also gets Trace, which is very interesting. There's probably some cool applications that you can figure out with that. And then just generally a good move pool. Like it gets Psychic, it gets Fire Punch, it gets Thunderbolt, I should say, and also Ice Punch. So it can work as a Calm Minder as well. But generally, kind of the Memento utility that you get out of this guy is really good. That's probably the moveset I would consider. Also gets Destiny Bond as well, hilariously. Yeah, you know, pick and choose what moves you like, basically, with this guy. Not bad. Okay, sorry, excuse me. I'm going to take a very quick break, and then we'll talk about Girafarig. Okay, I've had a quick sip of water and I'm back in the groove. So Girafarig is a normal ghost type, which by itself is already fantastic. That's really good typing. It gives you 3 immunities to pretty good attacking types, normal ghost fighting, and it's also got really good stats. So it's obviously a physically based Pokemon with Really good speed stat, good defenses, and a pretty good attack stat. But on top of that, it's also able to be paralysis immune with Limber, or it can spread or bounce status with Synchronize, which is really cool. This Pokemon's one of the best fighting type checks in the game, quite simply. I've talked a lot about fighting types and how strong I think they are, and how I think about kind of Gyarados and its role in that kind of slowing down of that, but Girafarig is honestly one of the most important figures in handling those Pokemon, I would say. So, a pretty standard moveset that I've been running. It can run so many different things, like there are things that I've probably not even considered that are really good. But I'd say a pretty standard moveset seems to be Body Slam, Earthquake, Shadow Ball, and then Wish I like to run last. I haven't really been too sure about the last move. I guess in theory you could run CB Trick. Doesn't sound too bad. But Wish is really nice there. I'm not going to give you my EV spreads because they're confidential, but it can obviously hit some pretty important benchmarks, both offensively and defensively. So yeah, consider those. This thing's perfectly viable in OU and probably decent, I would say, in OU as well. So being in UU is kind of a nice thing for it, to be honest, because it really shines down here. Yeah, that's Girafarig. Not much else to say. Really good at checking the fighting types. I've gone too far out, haven't I? Okay, next Pokemon seems to be Glaceon, so I'll just have a look for that. Okay, so, yeah, Glaceon. It's another Calm Mind user, but this time with a Stab Ice attack and a very high special attack stat, as you can see. Other things it gets, which are quite interesting, are Barrier. And does it still get Hydro Pump? Yeah, it still gets Hydro Pump, so you can run Barrier, Hydro Pump, and Ice Beam. As such, find an opportunity in the late game to just completely obliterate everything with this, and that's Glaceon. Not much else to say. Seems pretty cool. Next Pokemon is... I'm not talking about Gliscopod, I still don't think it's that good. Next Pokemon I'm going to talk about is Grimmsnarl. What do I say about this guy? I don't know, I just think he looks interesting. What does he get? He gets Spirit Break, which is quite cool. It's a fighting type move that lowers attack of the opponent, sorry, special attack. But on top of that, it gets some funny little things like, I guess Focus Punch isn't really that funny unless you have a warp sense of humor. It gets Foul Play, which as a physical attacker it like kind of benefits from, because it can hit from both sides of the spectrum quite nicely, and it gets Stab on that as well. And then otherwise, yeah, I don't know, it gets Thunder Wave on a fighting type's quite funny. Sucker Punch as well if you want some priority. Yeah, give it a go. Seems like a nice mon actually. I don't think it's really that impressive defensively though, it's quite slow. But regardless of that, it is also a fighting type that's immune to psychic moves, so you can punish Calm Mind users pretty hard with Foul Play. Not bad. Grumpig is... Did I talk about him last time? Yeah, I did, didn't I? Yeah, he's got a good move pool. Gets Whirlwind, gets Trick, which just I wouldn't consider it unless you're feeling zany. But I think he's probably one of the best Calm Minders, if not the best. The speed stat really hurts though. A lot of mons in this tier are really quite slow, so speed is kind of, you know, quite a nice thing to have in this tier. If you can find a Pokemon that's fast and fulfills a good role, then yeah, it's going to be doing well, because Grumpig's kind of in this crowded area where it doesn't want to invest too much in its speed because it is very bulky, but then on the flip side it'll get outsped and just punished by things like Moltres as a result. So yeah, there's a conundrum for sure. Apologies if I haven't gone over Grumpig, but I think I did in my last video, so I'm not going to bother this time. But yeah, Grumpig's really good. Gyarados I'm not even going to go into. Hariyama also the same, I've talked about them. Anyone else here, I suppose? Houndoom seems like a good pursuit user, so you can run Flash Fire or Early Bird depending on, again, what you're trying to achieve. Flash Fire helps against things like Charizard or Plusle, or maybe even Dunsparce, which I think is a good Pokemon with Flamethrower. But Then again, early bird also means you can absorb sleep from things like Executor pretty comfortably, so they're both worth considering for different things depending on what you need. But yeah, this is a strong special attacker, pretty similar to Bishop, but a lot faster. Base 95 special attack stat, special speed stat. Yeah, base 95 special speed stat. Gets fire moves. HP water doesn't seem too bad to hit fire types. It's the same as ADV. I don't think it's actually changed. Yeah, doesn't seem too bad, but I just don't like how frail Houndoom is, so I'm not really a big fan of it in general. But for those who can make it work, yeah, I'm sure it's pretty good. Okay, so next Pokemon's Lumise, a very fast physical attacker with Trace. Probably pretty decent with a Choice Band set. This thing is like in the weirdest comparison in the world to some, or maybe not that strange to others who've played the tier a little bit. It's just a mini Aerodactyl in a lot of senses. It runs a bug type move. It runs Brick Break, I suppose. And you slap a Choice Band on it and Trick potentially. Oh no, this guy doesn't get Trick. I think Volby gets Trick, but yeah, and you just put those on and you just kind of do stuff. I think it's got high potential just because of how ridiculously fast it is, but yeah, I've not used it. It seems a little difficult to consistently make work just because it's a bug type, which isn't really that great or interesting. And it's, you know, it's made of glass, or it's made of paper rather. You could probably punch a hole in this thing with the weakest of Pokemon. So yeah, give it a go if you think it has traits that your team needs, I guess. Incineroar, I've put on my list to talk about. I don't really want to talk about it, but people keep asking me how does Incineroar work in this tier. I don't know. I guess it just might work, you know, through osmosis. Like if you just absorb the very essence of Incineroar, it might work. It gets Intimidate, which is pretty cool actually for a Pokemon to have. And it's got well-rounded stats, I suppose. So, and a really, really big move pool. Actually, it gets fighting type moves and fire type moves and dark type moves, and it gets Earthquake, and apparently it gets Lick if you want to try and paralyze stuff. I don't know. Probably should use Body Slam though. It gets Roar, Taunt, Toxic, fire type with Toxic, you know. As I mentioned before, pretty nice. Baton Pass even's pretty cool. Yeah, Incineroar. Don't really see why you'd use it over other fire types, but maybe it's very good at something that I've missed out, I'm not sure. Let's talk about Jolteon though, because Jolteon's interesting. Jolteon's probably the fastest offensive Pokemon in the tier. That isn't Electrode or Regieleki. The latter of which not really being offensive. The cool thing about Jolteon now is it gets growth, so it's the same as standard ADV, but it gets growth. And obviously, the problem that Jolteon has in OU kind of just doesn't exist here. Like Pokemon like, you know, for example, Claydol and Blissey, they just don't really exist. So you've still got to deal with Chansey, I suppose, but you know, Chansey's probably not as good as Blissey is in OU, and that makes Jolteon a lot better. It's also able to outspeed Gyarados a +1, as I was mentioning earlier, and its move pool is not really that diverse, but it is just good enough to do some really cool things. I think Jolteon's probably a pretty good Pokemon. I've not really been using it recently because there's just so much stuff to explore, but I've seen Jolteon pull some good results. The next Pokemon is Jumpluff. So Jumpluff, I think, had a stat boost in some form, probably just the special defense by the looks of it, and the HP, which is really cool. And then it was also given Rapid Spin. That's the new Jumpluff. Otherwise, it's the same annoying thing, just now with Rapid Spin. So yeah, it does seem really good on stall, I would have to say, just because it's completely ridiculously annoying, being very fast, having Sleep, having Leech Seed, and then also having Rapid Spin and Encore. So yeah, have fun dealing with that, I guess. Next Pokemon is Jinx. So Jinx did fall down to UU. I feel like Jinx is probably really good, just because it's so strong and gets a strong Ice Beam and has Lovely Kiss. I've not actually gotten around to using it though, because I just don't really enjoy these kinds of teams. I'd rather use something like a Frostlass and set myself up to be stronger in the mid game than just try to brute force my way through into a favourable mid game with a very hacks dependent Pokemon like Jinx, but I can't deny that it's probably pretty good. I would say the same set as OU, just because it's the same Pokemon as it is in ADV OU. You would try to probably run on this. Yeah, it doesn't get anything new. Just run the standard sets that it uses in OU, to be honest, and see how you go. Next Pokemon is not any of these guys. I could talk about Kecleon, I guess, but I'm not hugely convinced. The reason why I do want to talk about it though is because Protean is what it gets, and Protean is absolutely busted. It's so strong. Obviously having a base 90 attack stat is not really that relevant when you get stab on everything you click, so that's quite nice. Otherwise, it's just the same Kecleon, just with a bit more strength behind its attacks. I think it could definitely do some cool stuff. It's pretty specially bulky. I think I've experimented with it in the past and it was okay, but it's very slow, so you have to deal with that. Then there's Kingdra. Okay, Kingdra. Obviously dropped from OU, where it's viable. ADV OU specifically, it's viable, I would say. And yeah, the sets are the same. It's the same Pokemon. So you'd run Swift Swim with probably Rain Dance and just some special attacks, and try to clean in the late game. The thing that I think makes it way better in this tier than it would be otherwise is the fact that the water types that exist in this tier, they're just not as bulky, generally speaking. I think running HP Electric, which you probably want for Gara anyway, alongside Ice Beam and Hydro, seems totally fine. Seems like a good idea. So yeah, Kingdra for sure, definitely probably quite a scary threat that I've not actually encountered or witnessed anybody else using yet, but I think it'd be good. Okay, so let's talk about Kamala. Okay, where should I start? So Kamala is really interesting, I think. I kind of added this with the intent that it would hopefully be in OU, as in like I was the person who submitted this Pokemon and it got voted in. And I did hope for it to be OU viable, as all of us do when we submit, but it just doesn't have a good enough stat spread, really, to work. The intent was to make it like a little mini Snorlax, basically, that has full status immunity and rapid spin, as it naturally gets. It's really good down here, though, in this tier, I think. I've had some really good results with it. Just because against defensive teams and against stally teams, it's just a complete hard counter. If a team is just dependent on slowly whittling things down with, I don't know, with burns and paralysis and toxic, and Kamala exists, and the only way to really hit Kamala is with like a Seismic Toss Chansey for any meaningful damage, they're just not going to break through it, to be honest, because Kamala actually learns Wish, which means it can passively heal itself, and it also gets things like Body Slam and has a pretty good physical move pool, pretty much the same as Snorlax, so it gets Earthquake, Brick Break, Focus Punch, Shadow Ball. It doesn't get Self-Destruct though, but it gets those and gets Bulk Up. It could be a real pain for defensive teams for sure. So I really think this mon could be quite good. I think it will probably be one of the best mons in the tier after a little while. I do hope for it to be, just because it's my own submission, so maybe I'm a little bit biased, but I really love the roll compression of this guy. It's really cool. Next guy is Lantern, I believe. Yeah, I'm not going to talk about Crocodile. I don't have enough experience looking at it, to be honest. I mean, there's literally hundreds of mons here, so yeah, apologies, but Crocodile, obviously, if you just kind of look at these stats here, you can see it's probably pretty decent. It's faster than a lot of things, and it has Stab Earthquake off of that attack stat with Intimidate, which is really cool. But Lantern is one of the few Pokemon that checks Plusle really effectively, with Volt Absorb, obviously. You can run Volt Absorb, and you're immune to electric type attacks, and then you're resisting the fire type attacks. The only problem with Lantern is that it's not that fast, although it does seem to have been boosted in its speed stat, or maybe I'm just misremembering, I'm not too sure, to be honest. But the main drawbacks are that, and the fact that its move pool's not that exciting. Like, it does get Thunderbolt and Hydro, and Ice Beam, but it's only got a base 86 special attack stat, so it's not really that scary, to be quite frank. And then what else do you run? I guess you can run Thunder Wave or Toxic to try and, you put things on a timer like Chansey, but yeah, the main issue is really things like Chansey and Regice are just, you know, they're not that scared. I mean, I suppose Regice kind of can't do anything back other than explode and status it, but, you know, a status Lantern is not really a nice position to be in, to be honest. It's weak to Earthquake as well, and anything faster than it with Earthquake is just going to completely, like, flatten it. Yeah, so, I mean, Lantern's definitely got a place just because of the plus will check, but otherwise not that interesting, frankly. But still probably decent. Next Pokemon is Lopunny. I don't think I talked about Lopunny in the previous bit, so we'll talk about it here. No, I did talk about Lopunny, I remember now. Yeah, just be something to be prepared for, basically. It's really fast. Its attack stat's not that huge, but it doesn't need to be. And it's got one of the best utility move pools in the game. I think I forgot to mention that Encore is one of the moves that gets, so you can run Encore in the 4th slot with your 3 attacks and just close out endgames where Pokemon can't really switch out in fear of dying because you're so fast. So that's quite funny. Lopunny's really cool. Okay, so there's also Ludicolo on the same you know, wavelength as Kingdra, probably pretty good, but it's the same Pokemon as ADV, so I don't really have anything interesting to say about it. Lunatone, on the other hand, is the same Pokemon, but has completely different roll compression because it happens to be a Gyarados check, both with Explosion and Calm Mind, and it also gets things like Hypnosis, Ice Beam, it gets Screens, and just generally has a really good move pool, as well as being Earthquake immune. I think those traits are definitely good enough to consider Lunatone on certain teams, because obviously you look at this thing and compared to a lot of the guys in this tier, its stats are not that impressive, but the typing and the kind of key role that it offers to a team, I think is worth considering if you're looking for an offensive attacker with both Explosion that also checks Gyarados. Because it gets Hypnosis as well, and it also gets Baton Pass if you want to try and slot that in there for momentum, but it seems a little difficult to fit though, just because Lunatone's not particularly strong. Next Pokemon is Love Disc, which is exactly the same and unviable. So let's talk about how Magneton. It's not really that good in this tier. It did actually drop from OU just because we went through a phase where the Pokemon Cloyster was so good that people just stopped using Magneton. And when people came around to submit their viability rankings, they put Magneton so low that it dropped, sadly, so he's down in UU. He's the same, he doesn't have anyone to trap of note other than maybe Registeel, which is quite funny, but Registeel doesn't seem to be, like, you know, taking the tier away by its hands. So Magneton's just a generic special attacker with nothing special for it. Yeah, so if any steel type that it can trap pops up in usage, like maybe Bisharp for example, or not Steelix, sorry, which it can't really effectively trap because it's just not strong enough. But maybe Registeel or Bisharp, I guess it could be quite interesting. But for now, yeah, Magneton doesn't really have a niche. I thought it was worth mentioning that just to kind of point out what it's doing in this tier. Mamoswine, probably pretty good. I've not actually put it on my list though because I don't really know how to talk about it, but it's the same as DPP, Mamoswine, in all senses other than it doesn't have Snow Body, or Ice Body, sorry, or Snow Cloak, that's the one. It doesn't have Snow Cloak, but is otherwise the same Pokemon basically, so yeah, go and figure it out if you think it's a fun Pokemon, why not? We've got Mantine, so probably Water Absorb if you want to use Mantine, just because it is a pretty good special wall to a lot of things. Specifically Calm Mind attackers because it gets Haze, and Mantine can then trade down with the special attackers by using a Haze Toxic rest set. It's definitely bulky enough to take some hits from them and trade, which I think is pretty cool, and probably a little niche it has that I've noticed. It's the same as basic ADV, so yeah, if you want to try some basic things out, like basic ADV, which I've accidentally called it, then yeah, you can use this basic Pokemon to play the basic way of this tier. Marowak I don't have anything interesting to say about. It's the same old Marowak. But Marowak Alola is pretty cool. We've noticed that it has quite decent roll compression, and even though it's pretty slow, it makes up for that by being able to hit like a truck with the club item that it can use. So it's kind of similar to base Marowak, to be honest, except it trades a fire stab move, a ground stab move for the ghost stab, and also fire stab as well, which is not really so noteworthy, but still interesting, I suppose. It still learns Earthquake, so it doesn't lose out on that or anything, but it then gets Shadow Ball as well, and things like Fire Blast, which it gets the stab on now for a little bit extra damage, kind of despite its low special attack stat. And it also learns things like apparently Will-O-Wisp and Thunderbolt, which is quite cool. I don't really know too much about it though, to be honest. I think it's a bit of a trap Pokemon, but people really seem keen to try and make it work, and I kind of acknowledge that being able to check Parcel and not being terrible against certain other things like Hariyama is quite nice, to be honest. So for sure, yeah, I do like this one. It's quite cool. So excuse me. So what's the next Pokemon? Mawile. So I'm not talking about the Stakeout set. It's not a thing. sorry to disappoint all the believers, but Stakeout's not a real thing on Mawile. And the reason why is because if you're using Stakeout Mawile with Meteor Mash and you miss, then you're playing with 5 Pokemon. Quite simply, and it doesn't have a suitable alternative attack that you ever want to click. You're clicking Meteor Mash every time, and you're hoping you hit something and 1-hit KO it. Or at least 2-hit KO on the second turn. That's all there is to say about the Stakeout set. But Intimidate, I think, is pretty cool. This is a pretty bulky mon, especially if you max out the special defense and the HP. And you don't need to run Meteor Mash personally, I don't think. You can just run Seismic Toss. And some supporting moves. It gets Slack Off. Slack Off? Slack Off, Slack Off. It gets Thunder Wave, it gets Toxic. It's Toxic Immune itself, which is really cool. And it gets Circle Throw as well for phasing. So it gets some really nice moves paired with Spikes that can cause some problems for the opponent. It gets a very slow Taunt, which I don't think is really worth considering, but yeah, these moves seem pretty good. This seems like a pretty nice set to me, to be honest. It's obviously useless against Sableye, and maybe Haunter if people are going to use using that, but otherwise, nice. That's Mawile. Really difficult to kill if you are playing defensively, I would say. But it's not too bad explored either. It's been a very long time since I've used this, and I can't remember exactly how it works. Medicham, however you pronounce it. This is just the, the hyper risk, hyper reward Hariyama, as I was saying in the other video. I've just remembered that, so I'm not going to cover him. But I think he has really sky high potential because he's a fast physical attacker as well. Well, not hugely fast, but fast enough. Next Pokemon is probably Milo. So Milotic's exactly the same. It's difficult to make it work though. I've tried using it and it just fell flat on its face. I've used it both defensively and offensively, and whenever I've used it defensively, I've wished, I wish I was using more attacks so that I could hit this opponent properly, like this Substitute Gyarados, which is now setting up in my face, or this Miss Magus with Substitute, which is also setting up in my face now, or this Substitute Grumpig, which is now setting up in my face. But and then you use the then you use the offensive set, and you find that you're not able to effectively punish things or make good progress with it. You kind of get stuck in this little situation where you don't know whether you should be running Recover so that you can light check some certain mons, or maybe you should be running HP Electric, or you could even run Hypnosis, I guess, and risk missing 3 times in a row. It's just a very difficult Pokemon to make work, and I don't know why, because it's got amazing stats, obviously, but it's been really difficult. So someone please on my behalf make this Pokemon work, because it's got all the pieces, for sure. Like, it's really got all the pieces. It's just actually, finishing the Jigsaw itself has been really difficult for me, I think. Yeah, pick him up. Cool. Miltank. Uh, Miltank's cool. It's another thick fat guy with pretty good bulk, to be honest. Pretty good. A very good speed stat for a defensive Pokemon. And really good utility move pool behind, obviously, Body Slam, gets Heal Bell, gets Milk Drink, and it gets things like Thunder Wave, Earthquake, Toxic, you know, the usual utility stuff, really. I think, for sure, as a physical attacker check, obviously not against fighting types, it probably has a really good place. It can turn physical matchups kind of on their head and Body Slam paralyze them, or T-Wave paralyze them even if it's running that. And I think, yeah, for sure Miltank's probably pretty decent. What else is there to talk about? Let's talk about Minun. We've just hit the hour mark, so my brain is starting to spin a little bit. I'll keep going for a minute or two, but I'm going to have to take another break in a second. Yeah, Minun is a Levitator for sure. You don't want to be running Volt Absorb unless you're building around Volt Absorb Minun, which is an inferior Pokemon. And I'd say a pretty standard set is to just run Thunderbolt, Ice Beam, Encore, and Baton Pass. And as I was mentioning earlier, this Pokemon is now a Gyarados check that is also very offensive, which is its niche, I would say. It obviously gets a fast Encore and Baton Pass as well, which is really cool, and I think this guy's a good lead. It has pretty good matchups into most lead Pokemon that people have been using, like, yeah, my mind's just gone completely blank, but in all the lead teams that I've been using it as a lead, it's been pretty good. Yeah, I'd say Minun's pretty cool. It's not very strong though. That's the problem. It's only base 85 for special attacks, so these attacks don't hit quite as hard as you'd like prefer, but they do just enough. Like the Ice Beam gets a stab for free, more or less, because its defensive profile doesn't really matter, and Stab Thunderbolt's always good. So yeah, it does just about work, I would say. Mismagius, I already talked about. I don't really have much more to say about him for now. But I do have some stuff to say about Moltres Galar, because this mon's really cool. It's very specially bulky, to the point where it kind of blasts off even super effective attacks. And it is also a Pursuiter with Fiery Wrath as its main stab attack. So this is honestly just good enough, and then you can kind of run whatever you want alongside these moves. You can even run Rest Talk with Roar. Is really funny. You can kind of use it like a defensive Zapdos, but in this tier in UU on a Moltres Galar, and PP Store stuff. So that's funny. Finally, it gets Taunt as well, so you can also stop things from trying to get too greedy. But it doesn't really have any targets for Taunt, so. Other than maybe like a Chansey, you can prevent the Toxic and the Soft Boiled and just slowly whistle it down, which is quite funny. But yeah, it's a pretty good Pokemon. I quite like it. Interestingly, it also gets Power Plate as well, but I do think Fiery Wrath is better for the flinch chance because its speed stat's pretty good. Like it's outspeeding quite a lot of stuff with some investment. Oh me, oh my! There's so many mons. So many guys, like, play Hoenn, Gaiden, UU, like, look how many guys there are. Like, there's Mr. Mime and Mr. Rhyme, you know? They both come to the party. It's amazing. Let's talk about Mr. Rhyme then. He's a funny guy, you know? He's got the cane, he's got the mustache, he's got batwing ears, I guess, on his hat. It's funny. And he's pretty similar to Jinx. He's got the same typing. He gets budget Lovely Kiss. He gets the budget speed and the budget special attack. But he's a little bit less frail to make up for it, you know? That's Mr. Rhyme. He's just Jinx too. Apparently he gets Thunder Wave as well, which is really funny. Yeah, I don't know, like, if you analyze Jinx and Mr. Rhyme specifically, you could probably find out which one of them is better, but as I was saying earlier, I'm not interested in Jinx as a Pokemon, so I've not done it. But yeah, Mr. Rhyme's probably decent. If Jinx is good, then Mr. Rhyme is probably decent as well. Muck. I clicked on Muck because he's funny. I don't actually think he's viable, so we're going to go to the next Pokemon, which is Ninetales. Ninetales now gets Fur Coat, which doubles its defense. And that alongside Will-O-Wisp and just fire type attacks in general is really cool in my opinion. I've tried using it and it's pretty decent. The only problem is obviously like if you're facing physical attackers which run Earthquake or Rock Slide, which is most of them, sadly, you're relying on a Will-O-Wisp hit to actually like to cripple them. And to be honest, Ninetales is really fast. Like it has no problem just running max speed and max HP and just fishing for burns. But it's not hugely consistent, and if you do miss and you get EQ'd, you're probably going to lose like 60% of your health easily. Especially if it's stab from like a Giraffe Rig or something. I mean a Sandler, sorry, not Giraffe Rig. Getting the two guys confused. But yeah, give Ninetales a go. I think it's good. A lot better than you might be led to believe, for sure. Has really strange and fascinating roll compression, I think, just because of Fur Coat. Makes it a completely different Pokemon. Obstagoon. I don't know why I've got this guy marked down. He's cool. He's just has guts, I guess, but it's just a very silly Giraffe Rig, in my opinion, without the fighting immunity instead of 4 times fighting weakness. Yeah, that's funny. Let's just not talk about Obstagoon. I don't really have anything interesting to say. Omastar is probably a little bit more interesting because he's same as base, but he gets Swift Swim and he gets Spikes. He gets Spikes, right? Yeah, he gets Spikes. Okay, sorry, I don't play ADVU, so I don't really know. He gets that. He's really strong. Quite fast in the snow, in the rain. If you can get a rain dance up, probably around here is good, so you outspeed Jolteon. I don't know. I'm just EVing this Omastar, even though I don't really have much to say about it. It's the same as base, and it's a Spiker. It's also a Rock and Water type, which is decent, I would say. Oh, what's the next Pokemon? One that I should probably take a break on, yeah. I'll talk about Piloswine in just a second. Okay, I'm back. Next Pokemon to talk about is... No, Piloswine. Okay, whoever made this Pokemon is very evil. Piloswine's been changed so its stats now look like this. It gains thick fat as well, so it's resistant to ice and neutral to fire, basically. And they decided it should get Slack off Shadow Ball for some reason. I don't really understand why, but it's funny. Earthquake and Ice Beam hitting pretty hard. Pretty similar to how Stantler works, although it's obviously way bulkier and way stronger. So that's always fun. Yeah, this Pokemon can't really do much if it doesn't have a target to hit, but if it lands the right mashup, it goes crazy. It's just really annoying to deal with because it's so bulky and so strong. And Earthquake Ice Beam is really good coverage just by itself, especially with Stab. What a Pokemon. It's not bad though, it's obviously very good. Plusle I think is the next guy. I'm not going to talk about Pincurchin or Pinsir. There's nothing really to say, to be honest. Plusle I've already talked about, so I'm not going to mention anything new, I don't think, because I really want to get to the end of this video. I'm exhausted. But Poliwrath, nothing really too interesting either. Porygon 2 did have a niche in the early days, back when Dugtrio Alola was in the tier, as a reverse trapper of that, because that Pokemon was ridiculously good. But now not so much, it's just mostly a status spreader with Trace. Status spreader with Trace, yeah, I mean, I guess it is. And a pretty good, evenly distributed stat spread. I don't think it really offers anything unique over something like Lopunny though, or Giraffe Rig, or even Kamala, to be honest. I think they're all better Pokemon to run just because they have much more strictly defined roles in the tier than Porygon happens to have, and Trace just isn't that consistent. I can't even really envision what you could use Trace for in this tier yet, just because there's so many things going on, but until we know, I guess things like Trace Porygon, Trace Illumise, Trace Gardevoir, not really worth running. And unless you find that niche, or that roll compression, I suppose. Next Pokemon is Relicanth, apparently. I put Relicanth... Oh no, sorry, it's Regice. So I'm not going to talk about any of these guys, they're all the same as base. I think Raichu gets Sweet Kiss or something, which, yeah, that's really funny, but it doesn't make Raichu suddenly viable. Sorry Raichu, I don't know why I singled you out. I think my brain's just cooked at this point, and you're the victim. So Regice is pretty cool. It's got really good stats. It's a legendary, obviously. And Stab Ice Beam off of base 100, which is always good. And it also gets Thunderbolt and other things that it always gets in ADV, so I'm not even going to bother going through them, but I think Regice has a nice roll compression. I am a bit scared of using it at the moment though, just because Plusle's so good in this tier. It can actually live, I'm led to believe, it can actually live a Fire Blast from full, which I suppose doesn't actually surprise me that much, because Plusle's not particularly strong. And I guess it threatens back a Thunder Wave in return, so that's cool. It's obviously physically bulky as well, like anything that's not packing a fighting move or a rock move, it's perfectly fine to trade hits with, like Gyarados. This can work as an emergency check to that as well, as I was talking about before, but and even things like Stantler aren't too good against it, so it can come in on Stantler and just start attacking it. There's loads of things that it actually does really well against, but it's always on a timer and it's always trying to just trade hits rather than effectively win the game by itself, but it's quite nice. If you need a stopgap against special attackers and even some physical attackers, it's quite good. Regidrago is something I've not really explored. Like, these stats are so warped that it's very difficult for me to actually like comprehend what it does. But it is a fastish mixed attacker with a really high HP stat. So, I mean, it gets Focus Punch, interestingly, so I guess you could run Substitute, Focus Punch, Dragon Claw, Explosion, with like... I guess you'd still run Leftovers maybe, but that could be quite cool. It also gets... What elementals does it get? I'm ad-libbing so hard at this point that, like, you can tell I haven't even done my research on this guy. Yeah, it gets Superpower, you don't need to run Focus Punch. There's no point, Superpower's good enough. Rock Slide, Ice Punch, gets Elemental Punches by the looks of it, Fire Punch. Cool. Give it a go, why not? It's a fast explosion user, which is always quite nice. Regieleki. The butt of many jokes in the OU tier for a very long time, because those stats, man, they're quite funny. These are not the standard Regieleki stats, obviously, because if it did have its regular stats in this tier, it would be busted. Not even down here, in OU as well, it would be completely ridiculous. So it doesn't get those, instead it gets Limber and weak offensive stats, and it just tries to be the fastest, silliest utility guy in the world, with things like BP and extreme speed if you feel like you're going to be somehow outsped with Limber and base 200 speed. You can always click that for a good laugh. But more seriously, it gets things like Heal Bell, I believe, and Rapid Spin, which is really cool. So, for sure, it definitely has a niche. It's just, can you ever justify that niche on a regular team? Probably not. But at the same time, I totally think this guy can work. Who's the next Reggie? Regirock. So, I discussed earlier that Armaldo feels pretty similar to this guy. Just this guy has Explosion, really. Is also fantastically bulky compared to Armaldo, so that's worth considering, both physically and especially. I think the main thing is that Armaldo doesn't really resist flying, so Regirock ends up being a better check to things like Dodrio as a result. Yeah, consider it. Not bad. Registeel is the last guy. Interesting you've listed it, even though I don't think it's going to be amazing in this tier, just based on what's good. But I still think the really cheesy, toxic Seismic Toss rest sets definitely have a place, because he's really, really, really fat. And the offensive levels are a little bit lower here. They're not massively lower. I think this tier is offensively not even that different to OU, to be honest. But Registeel for sure definitely can check a lot of things and outstall them. But things like Sableye and Kamala kind of just laugh in its face and just outstall it, so it can't really do anything to those Pokemon. Yeah, Sableye, Kamala, really funny against Stall, for obvious reasons. The next guy is definitely Relicanth for this time. I don't know too much about it. I guess it just runs... Oh, it gets Rough Skin. See, I don't even know anything about it. I've just heard it's good, so use it. I'm not going to say anything because, you know, there's no point. So Rhydon gets Mold Breaker now, and it is otherwise the same, I believe. I don't think it's changed in any way that at least I'm aware of. Excuse me. Yeah, so the main thing is it's pretty slow, but like with Mold Breaker, as I've learned, it's a really good late game sweeper, just with paralysis support, because it can set up the big substitutes. And then Earthquake and Rock Slide with Mold Breaker is pretty much all the coverage you'll ever need in this tier. It's fantastic. It hits everything neutrally. So you can just run Earthquake, Rock Slide, substitute Swords Dance, and you will sweep if you paralyze everything. He's bulky enough as well to take a hit from a lot of different things. For example, I don't believe HP Water from Plusle will one-hit KO it. I might be incorrect, but I think Fire Blast into HP Water does, so don't obviously let that happen. But yeah, things like that, and I think it can live even like Mine and Ice Beam. It's bulky enough to take a hit and just take the game away if you're kind of in the late stages and you haven't paralyzed absolutely everything. For sure, definitely consider this Pokemon. It seems really good. It's just so naturally strong and has really good attacks. So yeah, pretty cool. Next Pokemon is Roserade, and we're also going to do Rosea, which doesn't show up here because it's NFE technically, and the team builder hasn't been updated. So I'll put both of them side by side because they're pretty similar for obvious reasons. They're the same species more or less. So Rosea gets Cloud9 or Overcoat, which is better in OU to be honest, but Roserade gets a higher special attack stat and it's faster and a little bit frailer to kind of trade off as a result. But it then gets Natural Cure or Poison Point if you want to use those. They're both Spike Setters. They both seem a little worse than Chestnut though, because they have effectively the same strengths and weaknesses as Chestnut, but just without the bulk. Or rather, the bulk is kind of on the wrong side of the spectrum, I feel. But Roserade does actually get Aromatherapy, and Aromatherapy is really good, so I think it can work. Definitely give it a go. Over Chestnut if you really want to compress down that Aromatherapy use. The next thing is Sableye. If I can find it. There it is. So Sableye's been changed around to have immunity to Toxic and Poison, and also gain Pressure, which alongside its kind of base stat changes, it's a little bit bulkier now, and I think a little bit more offensive as well. It's just been creeped up a little bit to be at the stage it's at. I don't think it gets any new moves. Maybe it does. I'm not too sure, but it kind of does the same things really. You can run Knockoff and Recover. Maybe Seismic Toss alongside those things. And yeah, you just essentially attempt to stall out things. I don't know why Recover's not here. It does not recover, right? Am I going crazy? No, I guess Recover. It's just there. Yeah, it's just there. Cool. Yeah, it's probably stall specific. It's a spin blocker, probably the best one in the tier to be honest. Other than Frostlass itself, spin blocking while it sets spikes is always nice, but this guy is, you know, second scraps in regards to that. Well, he's not even really because he fits on a completely different type of team. But yeah, I feel like if you're playing a very passive team and your opponent has a Sableye, then they will just run circles around you, gaining knockoff, damage creep over you on time if you don't have any Pokemon that are able to really stall it or anything like that. Yeah, Sableye seems pretty good, to be honest. I haven't had a chance to build with it, but I like what it looks like. Sandslash now gets Analytic. It gets a bit more speed, I think. and also gets spikes, which is really cool. And I think it outclasses Donphan by itself just because of these factors, because it gets spikes and spin now, which is obviously better than Donphan. The thing though with Sandslash is it's just very difficult to hit certain Pokemon. For example, Miss Magus and Gyarados kind of just use it as setup fodder if you're not running Toxic. And if you are running Toxic and they're running Substitute, you get this little situation going on again where you can't really do anything to them and you're just sat there either setting spikes waiting to die, or you're switching out and not really accomplishing the thing you want to. So yeah, that's Sandslash. Spikes and Spin on the same set though on this Pokemon is really cool. I think it can work for sure, and I've played around with it a little bit and it's decent for sure, decent. Not quite as good as Dunsparce, but it's workable for sure. Sceptile, I have only ever played with one set, and that was a set with Leaf Blade, Thunder Punch, Crunch and Pursuit. It's freaking terrible. Don't use this set. It looks really cool and it looks really nice on paper because it does anti-meta a lot of the good Pokemon in the tier, like Gyarados for example, and Miss Magus I think it was specifically for handling because it's faster than it. But if people aren't running those mons, this thing is just terrible. It's not very good. Leaf Blade doesn't have any realistic targets in this tier. It's just not a good enough move. So Sceptile doesn't have a niche yet, I don't think, but and I was discussing this today in the Discord, I just don't think it's particularly great. Sadly, I was thinking about it and dwelling on it, and it's just very hard to fit on teams as a result, or very hard to justify as well. Okay, next guy is all the Slow Twins. I'm going to cover all four Slow Twins at once. I'm not going to go over Simipour or Surfetched. Simipour's a bit different because it's a very good mixed attacker with Water Stab and Fighting Stab, and it's really fast and really frail. I think it can really punish bad team building for sure, but I don't think it's anything too special just because it's not strong enough. And Surfetched, I really don't have anything interesting to say about more fighting types at this point. They're all kind of similar. This guy gets Swords Dance though, which is pretty cool, and Quick Attack, so yeah, that's quite nice. But let's talk about all four Slow Twins at once. So I'll put up Slowbro, I'll put up Slowbro Glar, I'll put up Slowking. Apologies for the incorrect sprites, and Slowking Glar. So Slowbro and Slowking are pretty good at just being really tanky. I believe they now get Slack Off as well, which is really huge. It does make both of them pretty good. The only issue with using them is, quite honestly, just how slow they are. It's just speed is really important in this tier, especially in the early days, I think. And while they are really bulky and they do have a lot of things they can check, they do just eventually lose to status, or people, predicting them coming in, they take more damage than they would otherwise. They're also obviously weak to spikes as well, so that doesn't really help. And they do compete with a lot of Pokemon that either clear or set spikes or take advantage of them themselves, and I don't think Slow Twins really do anything special to do that, but I can't deny that they really have a good niche in terms of being able to really turn the tides against things like Hariyama and Gyarados and other fighting types. They're definitely pretty good because of that. I think, depending on what you're trying to do, I think Slowking has some tools as well that can help it stand out, but I'm not really too sure about those, so I won't talk about them. But it does still fill a pretty similar role to the regular Slowbro. And then as for these two guys, Slowbro Glar gets Sticky Hold, which is really cool. It means you can come in on Sableye and not have to worry about it really putting too much pressure on you. And Slowking itself gets Neutralizing Gas, I think. That's right. And I've just not had a chance to play with it really, but that is a very interesting ability for obvious reasons, being able to prevent the opponent from using their ability. So one of these two guys, probably the Slowking, is almost certainly got some kind of niche here. Slowbro is quite funny as a Carmine setup user with Sticky Hold though, I guess, and a Poison immunity. So it's got both of those going for it at the same time, but it is definitely the slowest Carmine user, unfortunately. It's very slow. But I think for sure Calm Mind, Slack Off, Flamethrower. Calm Mind, Slack Off? It does get Slack Off, right? Flamethrower and Psychic. Alongside Sticky Hold and alongside Poison Immunity. I think that's definitely like something worth considering. For sure. Next Pokemon I'm going to talk about is apparently my team builder. No, of course, I'm going to talk about Scizor, which is not here. I'll bring it up anyway. So Scizor was initially banned from this tier because it was just not very fun to play around, and it had a lot of buffs that made it really good. It had a strong, reliable Bug-type stab in Lunge, and because there's no Permasand in this tier, it also could abuse using Morning Sun to heal itself, so it was a Steel type with Recovery, Strong Stab, and Swords Dance, to be quite frank. So you could run these kind of 3 moves and then whatever in the 4th slot, like maybe HP Rock or HP Fighting, and you could really take the game away with these things, just because it's got really good defensive stats as well. But yeah, things have changed. So, for example, Scizor's Lunge is a bit weaker now. That's been nerfed. It also lost Knockoff, which it used to have, so it can't actually use that anymore. And I believe that's pretty much the main 2 things, and we considered retesting it in the tier. I'm going to be completely honest, I just completely forgot to even team build with this thing because I forget that it's been unbanned, and there's so many tools in the tier already, but until we actually fully unban it from the team builder, which we haven't gotten around to doing yet, then yeah, there's not really much that I can say about this. I think it will definitely not be as good as it used to be. I think it's been hit way too hard by the nerfs to actually work in this tier again. But yeah, that being said, it's still probably good. It's a Steel type recovery, like morale, but obviously a lot stronger. The next guy apparently will be Smeargle. So, yep, so Smeargle, it's the same as base. I don't think it gains anything of note. It's just gonna play the same way, to be honest. I don't have anything unique to say about it because I've not used it and I've not seen it, but for sure, Smeargle's probably viable. It's going to be just as annoying as ever. Solrock, pretty similar to Lunatone, except it's more physically based, so you get more damage out of Explosion. And instead of running HP Electric to punish Gyarados, you can run Rock Slide and, you know, all or nothing, risk the obvious Rock Slide miss that comes and makes you lose the game. But that aside, you're kind of choosing between those 2 things, really. The trade-off is you can run, yeah, Rock Slide, Earthquake, probably Explosion like this, and just have a more threatening set in general, because Lunatone I don't think is honestly that threatening with its stats, whereas Solrock, once it gets into a good position, might be. But yeah, they both perform pretty similarly, I would say. Solrock doesn't get Hypnosis either, so it does lack a consistent way to status. As Lunatone can put things to sleep, for example. Okay, so we'll talk about Stantler. I don't think Sunflower is worth discussing. It's quite strong, just because it gets effectively Stab Fire and 120 base power Solar Beams for free. But we can talk about Sunflower, I might as well actually. So I think the set's probably Stun Spore, Solar Beam, Weather Ball because of Desolate Land, and then Synthesis in the last slot for the extra healing. I think this is a fine set. Nothing wrong with this. Max Special Attack Modest seems totally fine. Yeah, I guess this is a slow nuker. It seems pretty good actually. It can clear weather, so it's pretty good into Pokemon that try to set weather, like Kingdra, for example, which is absolutely impossible for it to actually set up rain against because it will block it. But until Kingdra's popular, I guess there's not really any reason to use Sunflower over something else, but even outside of those mashups, it's still pretty strong, so there's that. Next Pokemon to talk about is... Have I missed anything out? Stantler, I think. Yeah, I skipped ahead a little bit. So Stantler. Yeah, this is a really good mixed attacker. for sure. Like, it gets Earthquake, Psychic, both stab. Thunderbolt, Ice Beam. I can't remember if I talked about it in my previous video, but yeah, just set up your EVs to hit benchmarks on certain things. That's all I can really suggest. The stat spreads are a bit wonky at the moment. Just if you don't know what else to do, just honestly go Naive Nature. Sorry, Naive over Modest, and just go max speed with probably max special attack, and then like that. Doesn't seem too bad. You get Intimidate, which is really cool. It does mean you can soft check fighting types and threaten them out, especially if you're coming on a fighting type attack, which is really lovely. So yeah, and the reason why I keep getting it confused with Girafarig is because, yeah, that similar ability to coming on fighting types is really cool. But yeah, Santler's definitely one of the best Pokemon in the tier for sure. And Steelix. I've already talked about Steelix, I've already talked about Staraptor. Stunfisk Galar is a protein user with a very strange move pool. I don't really have too much to say about it. Tangrowth, that guy, I'm just going to fly through these because I'm getting really tired, to be honest. Tangrowth gets a Sleep Powder, I think. Let me double check. It does not get Sleep Powder, but it gets Stun Spore, and it has really good stat spread, to be honest. It's very physically bulky and has good attacking stats, and gets things like Earthquake and Block, which is pretty funny. Yeah, things like that. Chlorophyll as well, so that it can actually, you know, remedy one of its worst stats. It's a it's a pretty funny Pokemon to see in UU, because of the stat spread, it seems like it's in the wrong tier, but it's a grass type, so there's only so much it can do, obviously. Tauros, probably really good. I've used it a couple of times. It's got Intimidate, it's reasonably physically bulky, and it's pretty fast, so yeah, same as base though, otherwise not too different. So Tentacruel. Tentacruel's been buffed a little bit, just a little bit. It now gets access to Knockoff, which it doesn't get in Gen 3 otherwise. And actually, that might be the only buff it gets, I think. Yeah, it gets access to Knockoff. I guess Giga Drain gets buffed as well, which is quite fun. It does mean that you can... It doesn't mean you can do much, to be honest, because you'd probably rather run Toxic against water types, but you could hit them super effectively. But yeah, you can run this alongside Rapid Spin just fine. But it also gets Haze, which I think is incompatible with Rapid Spin, sadly. And otherwise, it's just a very fast Rapid Spinner, like I was saying earlier when I was talking about Cryogonal. I think it's really cool. It is bulky, so it can come in pretty early in Spin Spikes, but it doesn't have much longevity, really. It is Toxic immune, which is quite nice, but once it starts having to deal with like coming in on certain attacks, like even a non-stab Rock Slide from a fighting type, it's going to start taking loads of damage with the spikes down as well. So yeah, Tentacruel's not a bad spinner. It's just I've not really found a team that it fits on super well, I guess I could say, but the potential's there for sure. Toxicroak, again another fighting type. You have a poison immunity and you get Sword Stance, which is quite fun. And Toxicroak is actually pretty fast, so I think this guy's pretty good. He also gets water immunity with Water Absorb, which is useful. Yeah, give it a go for sure. I didn't even write it on my list, but just seeing it here, I think it's probably worth considering. So Tropius. Oh, Tropius is not very good. I don't think. It's really defensively interesting in that it has thick fat and grass dragon typing, which gives it some interesting resistances, like to fire and to electric, for example. Which means, you know, it's theoretically the best Plusle check in the world, just because of how bulky it is, and I think it gets recovered now as well, yeah. But it's just, I don't know, it just loses momentum very easily. Its move pool's kind of all over the place, like it gets Flamethrower and Calm Mind, and it also gets Dragon Dance and Earthquake and physical attacks, and it gets Refresh, and it gets Roar, and it gets Spiky Shield apparently, I've never even noticed that. And it gets Whirlwind and it gets Swords Dance, it gets all these moves, but like, it gets Leech Seed. And what else does it get? It gets, you know, it gets everything in the kitchen sink basically. But it just can't make it work with these stats. Like, it doesn't have a good stab or a great stab. I guess Giga Drain is the closest thing it's got to take advantage of, but yeah, that's kind of the issue with Tropius, is it's wanting to fit on fat teams, but I just think there are better options, like Chansey for example, or Chestnut for setting spikes, and Tropius just sits awkwardly, trying to fill every other niche that it possibly can that these Pokemon don't, while not really being good at them. So Tropius, in my opinion, while probably usable, not too sure about how consistent it will be. Yeah, I'm nearly done now actually, which is really good. Next Pokemon is Umbreon. I don't really have too much to say. It's the same as old Umbreon, except it gets Stab Foul Play now, so it's actually got a threatening way of hitting special attackers, which is really fun. And I think that alone gives it really good utility, just because it can actually deal physical damage to things now, or rather it can deal attack damage, I should say, not physical. Vaporeon, it hasn't really changed. I just think it's very strong and decently bulky, and just for those traits alone it's worth considering. And it can subpass as well, 404 subs to things, so Chansey's not a good switch in on it because it gets a free sub, and there is definitely a potential use there against defensive teams as a subpasser. Venusaur I think is base. Vespiquen don't really have anything to say about yet because I don't really know what this Pokemon does, but just looking at the stats, it is very fat and very strong Earthquakes. Does it get Heal Order? I guess that makes and breaks it really. So yeah, it gets Heal Order, I guess it's a signature move. Doesn't seem too bad to be honest, but you know, it's not very fast, sadly. Volbeat, I don't really know, so Volbeat's obviously been changed to look like this now. It's a very fast physical attacker, but also gets Galvanized electric type attacks with Tail Glow, hilariously. It's just that the base 77 special attack is not really that impressive. I mean, after a Tail Glow it's terrifying, but it's really frail, and if it can't one-hit KO something, then it's not gonna, you know, it's not gonna win the battle by itself. But very late game, it can probably clean up with the Spike Slam, for sure. Seems pretty potent just because Tail Glow. Who's next? Talked about Vaporeon, talked about Volbeat. Weavile is a fun little mixed attacker. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I can't even remember at this point what it does because my brain is half on the floor. But I think it could be quite good. It was initially designed to counter Jellicent, so you know, having done its amazing job of countering Jellicent so hard that it beat itself into the next tier where it doesn't exist, I think Weavile's really good. Use it for sure. And Weavile, Weezing, you know, Weavile, Weezing, got a lot in common, haven't they? That's why I'm talking about them, I guess. So Weezing is the same as base, actually, but it has, you know, the utility here of being able to check a lot of physical attackers really well. So for example, all the fighting types don't really have a good way of hitting this guy. They all just kind of try to, you know, snap him around a little bit with their Rock Slides and their HPs, but they can't do it, and Weezing really shines there. Amazing move pool as always, gets Will-O-Wisp, gets Thunderbolt, gets Flamethrower, Fire Blast, Destiny Bond, Explosion, Sludge Bomb, Pain Split. Yeah, he's really cool. Will-O-Wisp as well, I think I mentioned that the other day, I can't remember. And we're nearly done. We're nearly done. We're nearly done. Wigglytuff, I haven't put on the list, but it gets Fur Coat. This guy's just a physical Chansey with really silly physical bulk, but he's very passive. I think, yeah, it's similar to Chansey, just with a fighting weakness, which doesn't really matter. You can still emergency check fighting types because it gets so bulky with a double defense stat. Yeah, Wigglytuff's really nice. It's got the same special attack stat as Blissey as well, so you can actually run special attacks now and not have to worry about them doing 10% to your opponent. Like, they'll actually deal some form of damage, hopefully, if you're lucky. Yeah, Zartu, not worth mentioning. Yarn Mega is fun. It's the primary speed boost user in the tier. And it gets, yeah, the high special attack stat. It gets Dragon Claw and Giga Drain. And apparently it gets Pursuit as well, which is really interesting, because obviously if this thing comes in on something that like doesn't want to leave it get too many speed boosts, they will try to switch out, and you can potentially Pursuit them if they're weak to it, although I'm not too sure what those ones might be yet, because I've never built with this, but that's an option. On the other side, it gets Signal Beam, so it has some actual Bug Stab if you want to use that. It gets Whirlwind, gets Dragon Claw, I believe, which I've already put in there and already mentioned. Gets Hypnosis if you're feeling cheeky. Yeah, I've spoken to a few people who think this Pokemon's quite good, and yeah, I'm inclined to agree, it probably is pretty good. I think we're at the end of the list now. Yeah, let's have a look. Zangoose and Zarude. Zarude's probably terrible. Again, like Regieleki, he's kind of the butt of the joke of UU rather than OU. And even though the stats are amazing, it's just, you know, the typing's in the wrong place, and he gets outclassed by things very easily, and has really no defensive purpose either in the tier, I don't think, personally. Like, maybe he's good against Calm-Mindeds, but they tend to run Fire Punch and things, so yeah, I don't know, like, someone can probably make these stats work, I'm sure. But I hope this video was fun listening to. There's a handful of Pokemon I didn't even cover because, like, I would be here for the rest of my life if I tried to cover them, but that was probably very informative, and I hope you enjoyed listening.